and I hope you find this useful. I am trying not to deliver it as like the only way to do things, but we found something that works, and I'd love to see if there's ways to be additive to it. So the Linux Foundation, and we really got our start about as something called the Open Linux Standards Base. And the open software group, I forget exactly the term it started at, but it was about 2002. And then in 2006, it kind of pivoted to its current model, is basically a governance as a service organization, right? We are a 501c6 industry consortium, right? So it is a nonprofit, but it's not a charity. It's funded by membership dues, and it has built kind of a collaboration platform that started out focusing on open source code, but has broadened into a bunch of adjacent domains. The design of open hardware, things like the not the RISC. I'm sorry. What's the RISC-V project, which is an open CPU architecture, to community specifications and standards work, such as the Trust over IP Foundation. And other things. Actually, I'll give some examples of this. We are central to so much of the software that's built around the world. A lot of the value exchange, let me postulate, that happens in the open source ecosystem is non-financial. It is in the form of technical contributions that come in, and obviously the use of that code that goes out, right? Are kind of four pillars of any successful or any project we try to launch. First is a sense of neutrality. First is you want to have a common place where even if it's bootstrapped by one organization or a set of organizations, the participants know that, and the consumers of that technology know that that project will persist even if that originator moves on, cuts their budget, passes away, is that weak link in the chain, because they know that there's a neutral org that holds some of the core assets, but also keeps the engines running from a community point of view. They also need IP clarity. You need this to make the lawyers happy. You need this to reassure people that they're not going to get rug pulled by a term that's embedded inside an almost open source license. They want to know that a project is run according to principles of duocracy. I hate the word meritocracy because assessing merit is really fraught. But if you can say, hey, those who show up to do the work, history is made by those who show up, right? Should have a role to play in where the project goes. Whether they are contributing financially or not to the project it shouldn't matter. If it's an open source project, anybody should not only be able to use it and report a bug, submit a pull request, but they should be able to climb all the way to core contributor and have governance rights over where that project goes, no matter who they are, right? And then finally, some sort of financial support infrastructure that's not about paying a person to write 100 lines of code or paying for this thing to be built, but is about think of it like air traffic control. Think of it as an ongoing concern. How do you make sure that this project will be there next week, next month, in a year? Responding to security issues, responding to trying to recruit new members, and encouraging more growth in the ecosystem. So at the LF, we have a couple of different tiers of we think about doing a project in. One of those is there's a bunch of stuff we'll do for free. Now I'll clarify: we're not a grant-making organization. You don't have a pool of funds that we just get to throw out to projects that we think are leading projects, but through our overhead, through like the skim, like the very small skim, we're able to fund some stuff for free. So projects like SPDX, which is about standardizing licensing terms across open source and making that traceable and machine parsable, is a project we do for free. Chaos, which is a toolkit for assessing community dynamics on an open source project. We do that kind of thing for free. Then we'll do other things where it's like take that community basis and add just enough funding to do things like run the CI/CD systems or run the Linux Git repository, because it's not run on GitHub. It's for lots of reasons run on its own Git infrastructure. Do some spot things, but don't really try to make it just try to be supportive and fill in some gaps, right? So answering the question of why this works for so many people, first off, the heart of this has to be developers. If the developers don't show up to these projects, it doesn't matter what happens in them. It's just pissing in the wind. Also importantly, there's benefits to their bosses, right? To the folks who control budget, because it means there's a predictability that comes from this versus devs just working on a bare GitHub repo. And then really importantly to their bosses' lawyers, that IP clarity, knowing that there's not just an open source license to it, but contributor agreements have been tracked and those sorts of things, is enough to help open the floodgates to whether it's technical contributions on company time, or the kind of financial funding that helps these projects work. So as I mentioned, in kind of when we set a project up, the typical support mechanism is not grants, it's not one-time payments or anything. It's a sustainable membership infrastructure. It's saying, here's our sponsors of the project. They're assessed each year, a support fee. It's different project by project, slightly different because budget needs can vary depending on the phase of the project, depending on how many people show up and what their actual needs are. But there's an essential fairness to it. Any company could join. And by the way, when I say company, I don't necessarily mean for-profit. I don't necessarily mean the Google and Apples and Microsofts. There's those organizations that can join and be financial sponsors and be peers to the other entities there. Could be nonprofits, they could be government agencies, they could be grant-making organizations. It tends to be different than how those entities fund technology initiatives, and so it's been limited so far in how in how we get those organizations involved. But there's an essential neutrality to it, and any new company can join and be a part of it. Right? The way that we manage these projects is, first off, we're behind the scenes. We're trying to find the superstars in the projects and put them on the podium, make them successful, and manage the behind the scenes details, right? And in order for everybody to trust that these systems work, we've got to be competent from the boring bits, right? Making sure meeting notes are taken by the meeting so that when developers said, yeah, let's do this thing, like there's some record of that somewhere. You won't believe how much time is wasted by people, the bike shedding argument at best, right? As people perhaps have heard. IP policies being followed. This is how you get the boss's lawyers to let you, as a developer, work on this thing, even if you work for a very conservative company. And then let's see, anything else? Really, it's just about, actually, the key thing here is trust. We recognize that being a neutral organization, even in a space that should be as trustless as open source code, people can always fork if that trust is lost, and they should. If any neutral entity does something that violates the concerns of the community, the open source licenses guarantee you the right to fork and move on, right? And so we understand that that's delicate, and that the only way to kind of preserve that trust is to be competent and behind-the-scenes stewards of these projects, rather than trying to either aggrandize or flake or do the kinds of things that cause people to lose that kind of trust. Sometimes a bit of aggregation and a bit of scale can lead to both the trust and the persistence required to have projects that last decades.